All right, well, welcome to day number 15 of my 30-day art challenge. So I've been trying to come live streaming to you every weekday at 4 p.m., but I've also been kind of working on my own and doing some art over the weekend. So for the last 14 days, not counting today, for the last 14 days, I've been making these little pieces of art and inviting you all along to make art with me. So I know some of you have been tuning in daily. Some of you might be just tuning in for the first time. But as always, if you want to say hi in the comments, it's always great to kind of see where everyone's coming from and where they're tuning in from. So anyway, and remember, if you have any questions or comments, just post them in the comments. I'll try to take a look at them as I'm streaming, and then if I don't get a chance to answer them, I'll sit down and kind of type up a response later. So day 15, just kind of make an art. That's really just my goal of this. It's not to like stumble on any kind of great epiphany as I'm making, but it is to try different things, and then just to consistently like show up and make art. So today I am going to kind of do something a little bit different, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But yeah, I really just appreciate everyone who has shown up and has kind of watched and taken part in this journey. So let me go ahead and flip over so that you can see what I'm working on. So like I said, I'm going to try something a bit different today. I'm adding some extra limitations, and I think as as artists, that's kind of what we struggle with, or what we strive to do, is like set limits on ourselves. So first of all, I'm not going to use any watercolor paint. I'm not going to use my favorite Inktense pencils. Instead, I'm going to use this little tiny pencil here. You can tell I've used it a lot. This is a sketch and wash pencil. It's water soluble graphite, so it's going to give me just kind of a wide variety of kind of black and white values. So I'm going to use the graphite. I'm going to use black pens, and I'm going to use sort of like black and white fodder. And this is just some of what I picked out. I might find some more. And then the only other color I'm going to use is red. And so the red will be a nice contrast to the black and white. So I'm going to kind of try to keep things black and white, with the exception of using that red. So those are just sort of like limitations that I thought about. Like, okay, I'm gonna put that on myself. So before I dive in, let me kind of say a couple of words about limitations. I've mentioned this before, and I talked about it, I think, the first couple live streams that I did in this series. But as artists, I think a lot of times we sit down to make art and we just feel like, oh, I don't have any ideas. Oh, I just don't know how to get started. Oh, I'm out of my creativity. Oh, I'm in kind of I have creative block. And I think a lot of times what it is that we just haven't figured out how to limit ourselves, how to give ourselves some sort of parameters in order to make. And as an artist, that's sort of like what I try to do. Is like, okay, how big am I going to work? What materials am I going to use? What imagery? So I've already kind of given myself some limitations with this challenge. First of all, I'm only giving myself an hour. And actually it's less than an hour because I always kind of talk a little bit. So it's about 45 minutes that I'm working. Second limitation is the size, 4 inches by 4 inches. And then the other limitations are materials. So for me, I'm using collage and mixed media kind of stuff, but I'm not using any acrylic paints. I'm not using any kind of acrylic medium, so I've kind of limited that. And then finally, like, I've limited myself. I'm not putting words in consciously. So I might use text. There might be words on a map, but I'm not writing or drawing or stenciling in words like I might do in my journal. So those are like some of the limitations that I already had put in place. But today I'm really kind of putting that extra layer of limitations on myself and on my artwork. So just really kind of working with black and white, working with value, and then throwing in that pop of color using the red. So we'll see how it turns out. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and dive in. So let me switch back over. All right, so the graphite, the water-soluble graphite works just like the Inktense pencils, works just like watercolor pencil, but instead of color, it has graphite in it. And the key is to vary my pressure. So I just want to have some value down. And so I'm just going to lightly shade and scribble. And this is just to kind of get some things down. I'm leaving some big spaces, that way I get a nice kind of varied background. And just allows me to kind of, this takes the place of my paint, but I pressed very lightly. I didn't want to have a lot of pigment down because I want to build up the values. And if I go too dark with the graphite right from the beginning, it's going to be very hard to kind of come back from that. And so a lot of artists work from kind of light to dark. So you start off working out kind of light, and you're slowly adding the darker the darker values, adding more contrast. Not every artist does that. Some artists actually start off with a very dark canvas or paper and then kind of work from dark to light. But in this case, with the white paper, using the transparent medium, so the graphite is transparent, just like watercolor or the watercolor pencils. And then I've got a nice little varied background, and then of course I'm going to hit it with my hair dryer. And then I'm just going to kind of build up some layers just like I might with paint or with the water-soluble pencil. Maybe I'll go in with some of my organic type lines, since I haven't used those much, at least at the beginning of some of the pieces. And I am pressing a little bit harder so the lines really kind of show up, really kind of are there. But as it's not a lot of pigment. I'm not shading super hard with it, so I get dark lines, but I'm not going to end up with a real dark background. And then if I just sort of follow the lines to begin with, so what I find is that sometimes if I kind of follow the lines first, that kind of starts activating the water-soluble material. So whether it's the graphite or the Inktense or watercolor pencils, and that just sort of activates it, and then I can rinse out, get rid of any extra graphite, and then maybe just spread it a little bit. If I really scrub, I can almost get rid of the line. The lines will really start to lighten up, but I don't want to get rid of them completely. I want to have some variation. I want to have some of those dark lines in there. I did notice in the comments that Maddie mentioned using gesso. And gesso and water-soluble graphite is a really cool combination, and I've done it before. And the nice thing is with the white gesso, you can really create some interesting values and effects. But because I am not using any kind of acrylic on this, I want to keep it so that I can layer and keep things kind of transparent. But yeah, if you haven't tried water-soluble graphite and gesso, it's a pretty cool combination. All right, so I got my lines. Let me go ahead and hit it. All right, so I think, let me think about this. I think I'm just going to use my black pen. I'm going to put some vertical and horizontal lines and maybe some squares and rectangles. And as I've mentioned before, this really just kind of adds a lot of structure to the work. And I think with this, I'm just going to kind of try to do it quickly with that notion that, like, it doesn't have to be perfect. I do have a bit of a perfectionist streak in me, and sometimes I get to the point where I'm like, oh, it's got to be perfect. It's got to be, and it just kind of drives me crazy sometimes. And that's why I'm really enjoying this series, is that only giving myself 45 minutes to an hour to make something really allows me to sort of step back those perfectionist tendencies. So since I'm only using the graphite, I'm relying completely on value to give me some nice contrast, to give me some nice variety. So you can see how I'm now pressing a little bit harder and using that same technique that I use with the Inktense all the time. And just shading around the shapes. And then I'll fade it into the background. Come down this line. So this is an interesting challenge of to just use like a single color or a single material, or just trying to use value instead of color to really create that visual interest. So if you have never done it, I highly recommend. I mean, you might not have the water soluble graphite, but that could easily be just a black watercolor pencil or the black Inktense pencil. It could just be black watercolor paint or blue or whatever color you want to use. I like the black and white color scheme just because I can go really dark. I can get that really dark black value if I want to. And that's why I like the black pens, because it does give me that nice dark value. So just having these values now creates a lot of visual interest in the work, and that's something I think that young or beginning artists maybe struggle with is to how do you really get that contrast. And one of the easiest ways is with value. I am going to use color here in a little bit, but value is a great way to create some very interesting, some great visual interest in it. So I think I want to throw in some collage now, and I'm thinking I like the texture on this. I think I'll kind of resort to some ripping. that goes all the way across. So my glue pad here is just an old, inexpensive sketchbook that I got at some conference or whatever, and I've just used it for years and years. Some people use telephone books or catalogs. Actually, I don't even know if they still publish telephone books since everything's on the internet now. But I know a lot of people use catalogs, and especially this time of year, you start to see more and more catalogs show up at home. At least we do around here. Go ahead and trim those off. So I'm thinking that the collage now is kind of on top because it's black and white. It kind of fades in into the piece, but I do want to bring back those rectangles, those straight lines. So I think just doing some kind of retracing my lines might help. Maybe just make the lines a little bit thicker. This just really pushes the collage down into the piece. Makes it feel all a little bit more cohesive. go with my extra small, extra super fine pen. Maybe bring up some of these lines. I find this mix of more organic lines and shapes contrasting with the more geometric shapes. I find that pretty interesting. It's a nice contrast. So in some of my other pieces, I've used some mapping kind of marks to kind of introduce some of that more organic, that organic feel to it. But this is definitely not mapping. It really starts to become some kind of organic form. Some people say that it looks like a tree, that this is like the trunk and then it comes up. I don't know if you can see that very well. Okay. I'm thinking I have a photograph that actually is not black and white, but it's almost black and white, and I just don't know. I pulled it out thinking it might be interesting. It's one of my favorite photos that I've taken while I was hiking. So I don't think I'm going to use the whole thing. I mean, it has a little tint of green in it, so it's not totally black and white, but it still has that kind of feel to it. I definitely am not going to use the whole thing, but maybe I can use pieces of it or something. So this is just, I think somebody was asking on the comments about the photo paper. This is just a laser print on regular printer paper. So it's not the special photo paper or anything like that. It's just printer paper. And yeah, I know some people are very, very much like, oh, but that's not archival, and oh well. Just don't know. I like these trees, these like dark trees here. I just don't know if I want to use them. almost feel like they can fit here and then kind of get continued off. Maybe that's what I'll do. Never know unless you try. So Linda's asking about photo paper or whatever. So I have access to a laser printer, so I do a lot of just printing on regular printer paper, just the thin, flimsy paper. But with inkjet printers, you can use photo paper, and it tends to last longer than like just printing it on plain printer paper. If you print inkjet on plain printer paper, then it's very water soluble, and so you end up with you can end up with the ink bleeding over time. So it's just something to kind of be wary of. I don't use a lot of inkjet in my work. Sometimes I use it for image transfers. There's some different image transfers that you can do with inkjet, but mostly I'm using the laser printed images. So I think to kind of tie in this collage, I'm gonna just try to make some darker lines that come in and go off of it. Just try to tie it into what I already have there. little bit of darker value with the graphite. I think I want to use some of my bingo numbers in there. Somebody had asked, I don't know if it was here on Facebook or if it was on one of the on YouTube, because I take the video and I upload it to YouTube as well, and so some people watch it there. But somebody had asked if there was any special meaning about the numbers, and somebody joked I had 3 numbers on it. They're like, "Oh, is that your locker combination?" But there's really no significance to the numbers that I'm choosing. They're pretty random. But I don't know, I've been really fascinated with using them. And the only real significance is the fact that they come from my wife and I going to a fundraiser back pre-COVID, and a little bingo fundraiser for an animal rescue that we support. And so so anytime I see those numbers, I kind of think of that. So that's the only kind of personal significance. But I think the numbers kind of tie into the mapping. So we think about numbers on maps, but then also I just kind of, it's a link to language. It's a link to words, but it's not explicitly using words. So it's a way to kind of push up against my own limitation. But then it adds an ambiguity. I mean, when we look at it, we kind of think like, oh, well, what what does it mean? And it's like, oh, is that a location? Is that something else? So we kind of, when we see the numbers as a viewer, we kind of wonder, like, well, what does it mean? Why are they there? And we start to kind of concoct some kind of story or some kind of idea about it. I'm just finding that hitting the collage pieces with the hair dryer just kind of helps really set them into the piece. It helps just to dry the glue off, so that way it's kind of less likely to peel up, especially if I paint any more over top. I think I want to go ahead and start introducing some red in here. Again, thinking about maybe some mapping marks, and thinking about maybe some dashed lines. So when we think about kind of some dashed lines on maps, we think about borders and boundaries. A lot of times it indicates trails and other sort of pathways. And I guess with the tree imagery, definitely this notion of like a trail, because the trees, the photograph was taken on a hike on the Appalachian Trail. And then the way I'm drawing in the dashed lines is more trail-like than it is like a border or a boundary. But by repeating it over the entire image, it helps tie everything together. If I had just done it once in one spot, it would have looked kind of odd. But balancing it out with more, and it's subtle. It's kind of a, I don't even know how well it's showing up in the video, but right now it's a pretty subtle thing. I'm thinking that I'll probably end up with some stronger lines of red in it, but for right now, I'm liking how that's working. I kind of feel like I want to have some really solid lines of red in there, but just trying to figure out how. I don't mind if they're straight, but I don't want them to be kind of vertical and horizontal. So I am kind of thinking more of like a boundary line. So the black pen I'm using now is a little bit thicker, creates a thicker line. I just had, I don't know if it's a crazy thought, but I had a thought to use something a little bit different. Let me pull it out. Alright, so I pulled out some tracing paper. And the reason I pulled out some tracing paper is because it is translucent. I'm actually not going to trace anything. Oops. As I drop stuff. But if I use this and glue it down, the tracing paper will almost become completely transparent. But it will give it kind of like a hazy look in certain areas. And especially if I use some torn pieces. So I'm not going to cover the whole thing. Now, one thing about tracing paper is that it's very thin, and so it wrinkles very easily. And even with the glue stick, it will want to wrinkle and roll up. So I always try to pick it up where it's not going to roll up on me, but it likes to roll up when you put glue on it. So it's not the best material to use for collage just because of that. You probably can't even tell on the video, and I mean even here in live in person, it's a very subtle kind of thing. So we'll see how it goes. I can always layer up a few pieces to sort of heighten the translucent effect. Find this kind of interesting because the tracing paper does kind of give it this like foggy effect, and the photograph that I used, it was a very kind of foggy, misty day as I was hiking, So it kind of ties in. So I do want to go back, at least in some spots, maybe not all of it, but just maybe in a couple spots, go back on top of the tracing paper. And so what that will do is it will push the tracing paper down a little bit. And so in certain areas, it'll seem like the tracing paper is underneath some of the lines, and in other places, it will seem like it's on top. And that'll just kind of give it some nice variety. Okay, I'm thinking it's getting close to time, and I think it's getting close to being done, so I think I'm going to sign it and call it done. All right, so hopefully you like that kind of a bit of a change up, something a little bit different now. Um, so it's something to think about. It is how you might limit yourself even more. It's nice to kind of give yourself some general limits, but then especially like now with kind of trying to create something every day, sometimes it gets a little boring. Like, oh, I'm using this exact same materials. I'm using the exact same sort of like formula or things like that. So a simple way to kind of change things up is to limit the color. So maybe it's just like, oh, I'm going to do a black and white, or I'm going to do use just blues or things like that. So that's something to kind of think about. So if you have any questions, again, always just pop them into the comments, and then if I don't get a chance to respond to them here live, I'll respond to them later. But yeah. So appreciate you tuning in, and if if you can help spread the word, let people know that I'm doing this. Share. I greatly appreciate anybody that shares, likes, comments, and then that way more people can kind of see it, and hopefully more people will tune in and kind of see what's going on. So anyway, so like I said, if you got any more questions, feel free to pop them into the comments. But I think I'm going to sign off now. So thanks again for joining me for my live stream for my 30 days. I can't believe that we're halfway through. So 15 little pieces of artwork I have sitting now, and I need to scan them in and kind of show them off a little bit better than I have been. But anyway, so thanks so much for tuning in, and I will be back tomorrow, same time, 4 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And until then, thank you.